And the other thing I really want to emphasize is that this is not a new concept. This may be the first time you're hearing about it because it's new to the US, but agrivoltaics has been around for decades, like 30 to 40 years it's been around. Other countries have adapted it for the very reasons we're talking about today. The Netherlands example where land is very valuable and constrained, like you have to be efficient with your land use. And so people have been pairing solar with energy for a very long time. It's tried and true. And where it stands in the US is there are 597 sites that exist. A lot of them exist for research and education purposes. So you'll see a lot of the major universities that are involved in agriculture, they'll have an agrivoltaics research site. And then there are other sites that are not necessarily associated with a educational institution, but they're still existing for like research purposes, wanting to gather data on, okay, how are crop yields being impacted by having the shady environment part of the day? And so I'm going to pass it to Yora, and he's going to highlight a case study that shows you what's going on.
Yes, thank you, Savannah. And I want to emphasize, as you see, that most of the agrivoltaic projects in the US are still livestock and pollinator systems. So the combination of agrivoltaics with crops is still very much in a pilot phase, but results from those pilots have been very promising. And it's also just, I think typically the issue that I have that the sheep grazing often comes down to normal solar development, but then you can put sheep and say it's agrivoltaics, but it's actually just still the same system. Now you're just putting sheep. So I'm not a big fan of those unless it's designed really with the soil in mind, but otherwise, yeah, there is still some work to be done around what is qualifying as agrivoltaics. But of course, what's important is what does agrivoltaic do to my yields? And the answer to that is that it's very complicated. It depends, of course, on the year and the climate and where you are. It depends on your soil and your system type. But generally, what we see is that if you are in a very arid region, then the crop yields typically increase a lot because you have the heat stress as a limiting factor in your crop growth. So you now take that away and you allow for crops to grow without the limitation of water because the shade allows for higher soil moisture contents. So that's the top two results that I show here. I think that was done in Arizona. But agrivoltaics is not always going to increase your yield. And I also want to be honest about that. But what is very interesting about agrivoltaics is that actually if you take away about 30% of sunlight, so you create shading, you see that yields are actually pretty stable. In a lot of places, it's not going to affect your crops by a lot. Like maybe you will have 5%, 10% less yield. And then when you go above those 30%, then you start seeing a faster drop. So we typically try to stay up. Yeah, we don't want to go over the 30% if you're doing crops. It's funny because when you do cattle, there's huge benefits of doing it under agrivoltaics. They love the shade, they love the protection from rain. And you also see that when animals have less heat stress, they are also more productive. So you get a higher, you get a higher yield from your animal because they're not wasting their energy on fighting the heat. One example that I recommend everybody to look at is Jack's Solar Garden. It's agrivoltaic farm that has been around for 5 years now, and they are very public, so they share a lot of their knowledge, and their website is really cool, and you can see some videos, and a lot of the things that we know come from them. So yeah, I would really recommend looking that up. They host also events, and there's a lot of knowledge there. Then I want to get, as I said, I was at the National Farmers Union convention, and it was very interesting to see how much agrivoltaics is talked about right now. Both the Farm Bureau and the National Farmers Union have put out statements that they are supporting agrivoltaics. I think the National Farmers Union is discussing changing their statement a little bit and making it even more focused on agrivoltaics exclusively. And also the USDA has done a lot of research. They support, together with the Department of Energy, different pilot projects, and they have a lot of resources on agrivoltaics and its benefits. And I think that one thing that was talked about a lot is that, we need kind of a policy that defines what agrivoltaics is. And that's something that Okovate really stands for. We are the first agrivoltaics only company in the US, and we really want to set the standard for agrivoltaics. So for us, that means that we want to be farmer first. Solar should support your farming operation and not replace it. So we will always design the system with your land use in mind. We want to be reliable partners. Our team will handle everything from technical analysis to funding and execution. So you really focus on your farm. And for agrivoltaics, it's going to be very different compared to traditional solar because now you have two land users on the same land. So there needs to be very good communication. And that's why we always stand for being very easy to reach and always ready to help. And we also want to be very honest because in some cases, agrivoltaics doesn't work. I've looked at land that had very low infiltration capacity. So for example, if you're in a clay soil, and then, yeah, at some point, when there's a big rainstorm and all that water collects on the panels and you can get waterlogging, it might not be the best fit. So in those cases, we are also honest. We don't want to develop a system that doesn't work for the farmer, even though we can still make money of it. We also don't want to pressure you. So one important thing about agrivoltaics is that it is a long lease. You will be talking about 20 to 30 years. So we want you to feel comfortable to take that decision, where other developers in traditional solar sometimes put kind of a sense of urgency, and they include in their language that you have to sign within a certain amount of time, otherwise the deal falls through. Now, we don't do any of that. We want you to be extremely comfortable with what you're getting into because you're going to be farming that land for a while.